distinguished colleagues, esteemed scientists, honored faith leaders, respected policymakers, and devoted change makers. We stand today at a point in history where our shared fate is more intertwined than ever before. Around us, environmental degradation, climate instability, and biodiversity loss are converging into a threat that endangers human security, from livelihoods and health to peace and dignity. Shifting the needle isn't about small steps or symbolic gestures. It's about transformational action, bold, sustained, guided by evidence, inspired by ethics, and sustained by the conviction that human security cannot be achieved without planetary security. In this address, I will weave together 6 vital threads. First, essential role of multilateralism. Second, complementarity, power of beyond formal law. Third, the influence of ethics, values, and behaviors in shaping sustainable governance. Fourth, the undeniable link human security depends on planetary security. Fifth, reimagined human-environment relationship informed by reconciliation, moral renewal, spiritual insight, and humility. And sixth, the transformation and the potential of the science policy spirituality nexus, where empirical truth, policy logic, and moral vision converge. So let's consider a journey, one that holds not just intellectual urgency, but the moral weight of generational stewardship. First, human security rests on planetary security. Human security, once centered on armed conflict, now depends and demands urgent recognition of environmental determinants like food, water, health, and shelter. Our foundations rest on fragile ecosystems, and when they flatter, human lives unravel. The numbers are stark. The United Nations Secretary General warns that ecosystem collapse could cost the world about $3 trillion annually by 2030, gravely impacting the poorest nations. The World Bank estimates that losing essential ecosystem services such as pollination and fisheries could slash 2.7 trillion per year from global GDP. The Global Assessment Report of 2025 shows that while direct disaster losses average 202 billion annually, cascading impacts and ecosystem degradation push the real toll to over 2.3 trillion each year. These are not abstract figures. They represent lives lost, opportunities have forgone, and dignity eroded. Falling agricultural yields drive hunger. Polluted water fuels disease. Floods, storms, and droughts cause poverty, displacement, and social breakdown. The human cost is visible now, but at the end of 2023, 75.9 million people were internally displaced, a 51% increase just in 5 years, 7.7 million due to disasters alone. In 2024, that number reached a record 83.4 million, with families uprooted by both conflict and climate shocks. Baby Begum's story in Bangladesh, forced from her home by unprecedented floods, raising displaced children in an overcrowded slum, reminds us that environmental collapse is not just a policy issue. It is a profound erosion of the human spirit. In 2022 alone, disasters triggered 32.6 million internal displacements, nearly 60% of all such movements that year. Climate migration is no longer a projection. It is a defining reality of our time. We can shift this trajectory. Protecting and restoring ecosystems is not merely environmental policy. It is a human security policy. This means scaling up climate adaptation funding to meet the 300 billion annual need projected by UNEP by 2030, integrating nature-based solutions into national security and development plans, embedding climate resilience into infrastructure agriculture, and water systems, and ensuring that the most vulnerable communities, especially women, youth, and the indigenous peoples, are partners in decision-making. The choice before us is clear. Secure the planet, and we secure human hope, safety, and dignity. Fail, and we invite instability, loss, and despair on an unprecedented scale. The essential role of multilateralism. In a world of shared biospheres and shared risks, multilateralism is not a diplomatic convenience. It is a lifeline. From the Brundtland Report to the Paris Agreement, multilateral agreements have framed our common pursuit of sustainability. The Paris Accord galvanized nation states around a shared climate goal, while COP15's global biodiversity framework aims to protect 30% of land and water by 2030. But good frameworks demand delivery. Many nations remain behind in both mitigation and adaptation. The UN reminds us that ecosystem collapse already costs us trillions. Inaction amplifies these losses. Resilience investments pay off. The Global Assessment Report 2025 argues that investing in early warning systems and infrastructure could curb the ever-escalating costs of disasters. To shift the needle, multilateralism must become more inclusive. Cities, businesses, youth, indigenous peoples, and faith communities must all be stakeholders, not spectators. Faith leaders in particular hold moral influence across billions, translating policy into purpose. We need to forge multilateralism that is not only coordinated, but catalytic, uniting policy, ethics, and collective will. Now, formal law establishes private corners of behavior, but deeper change is rooted in conscience. Beyond formal law lies the wisdom of traditions, indigenous, cultural, and faith-based, that governs what cannot be legislated. Long before governments tracked protected areas, ancestral taboos preserved forests. Long before emissions targets, scriptures taught moderation and stewardship. The IPBES report warns that over 1 million species are threatened, with extinction rates tens to hundreds of times higher than the average of the past 10 million years. Laws alone cannot turn this around. Cultures can. Similarly, behavior-led shifts anchored in religious ethics can transform consumption patterns. Moral pressure can shape everything from individual consumer choices to corporate commitments and government norms. We need institutions and individuals to ask not just can we do it, but should we do it? By embedding values into our policies, guiding behavior with conscience, and mobilizing communities around shared responsibility, we can take decisive action to shift the needle. The patterns of environmental decline directly undermine human security. Disasters, migration, hunger, disease, inequality, conflict, all these are not hypothetical tomorrow risks, but they are today's reality. Urban areas compound this risk. Urban stretch with buildings responsible for up to 40% of global emissions is becoming increasingly unlivable as temperatures climb. By 2040, over 2 billion urban residents will experience more intense heat, and green spaces, once averaging 19.5% of urban land in 1990, have fallen to 13.9% by 2020. The economic cost of natural disasters in cities is projected to increase and exceed 1 trillion annually by mid-century. Adaptation costs are mounting. Councils estimate that investments must reach between 140 to 300 billion per year by 2030, rising to more than 280 to 500 billion by 2050. Yet the gap remains wide. These numbers are not abstractions. They challenge us to act decisively. By redesigning urban planning, prioritizing green infrastructure, and investing in resilience communities, we can take strategic steps to shift the needle. We must reframe our relationship with the world, integrating reconciliation, moral purpose, spiritual roots, and humility. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warns that humanity is waging war on nature. The weapons are greed and apathy. Reconciliation isn't a rejection of progress, but living in harmony with planetary boundaries. We require a new development paradigm that counts natural and social capital, not just GDP. Nature-based restoration could unlock 191 million jobs by 2030. Restoration of 2 billion hectares by 2030 is a core goal of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Faith communities must lead reconciliation, rebuilding trust, and reversing estrangement from nature. We need recognition of moral values in consumption and production. Sustainable consumption ensures efficiency, protects finite resources, and secures access for future generations. It must be shared as individual responsibility, corporate accountability, and government regulation. Institutions rooted in moral teachings, often those of faith, can guide this transformation with greater resonance than regulation ever could. We need rediscovering moral and spiritual roots of humanity and rights. Rights to a healthy environment are now recognized in international law, including the UN Human Rights Council's 2021 resolution. These rights echo the spiritual truths in religions and religious traditions that framed humans as stewards of creation. A shared universal doctrine built on diverse faith values could unite us. We need resetting from human superiority to human humility. The Anthropocene exposes our overreach, yet most religions teach humility. Many include sacred rests of land. These spiritual disciplines remind us that we are part of a larger community of life, not its masters. Humility doesn't diminish humanity, it dignifies it. What is our best last chance to shift the needle? We face a moment of destructive reconstruction, deconstructing harmful systems and rebuilding with ethics, inclusion, equality, and planetary care. A future where youth lead, gender equality is realized, and no one is marginalized. Multilateralism grounded in shared spiritual and ethical values. A socio-economic reboot with an environmental conscience. Religious institutions mobilizing billions through moral influence must become essential partners in achieving this vision. We need the science-policy-spirituality nexus. Science provides us with the facts, the evidence, and the predictions. From the IPCC 6th assessment report, we know that global surface temperature is likely to reach or exceed 1.5 of warming by 2040, even under moderated or moderate emissions scenarios. The World Meteorological Organization reports that the past decade was the warmest on record, with extreme weather events increasing in frequency and intensity by 30 to 40% compared to 1970s averages. Policy translates this knowledge into action. The Paris Agreement, the Global Biodiversity Framework, and the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration provide mechanisms for coordination and accountability. Yet, policy alone cannot reshape human behavior. Without ethical grounding and moral vision, rules can be circumvented. Compliance becomes mechanical, and ambition flatters. This is where spirituality, ethics, and moral reflection become catalysts. Faith-based communities encompass over 80% of the world's population, wielding a unique capacity to inspire value-driven behavioral change. When scientific knowledge is paired with ethical reflection, asking not just what can we do, but what should we do, it triggers transformation at the individual, community, and institutional levels. Let's consider practical examples. Faith-inspired environmental stewardship programs in Africa and Southeast Asia have restored degraded lands while educating communities about sustainable agriculture and conservation. Religious leaders advocating for climate resilience livelihoods have mobilized smallholder farmers to adopt sustainable water management, crop rotation, and biodiversity-friendly practices. In urban centers, interfaith networks championing green infrastructure, renewable energy adoption, and low-carbon transportation and are accelerating municipal climate plans. The nexus between science, policy, and spirituality is also crucial for ethical investments. Financial institutions increasingly recognize environmental, social, and governance, the ESG criteria. Yet the moral lens rooted in spirituality and ethical stewardship ensures these investments genuinely advance sustainable development and human dignity. The convergence of these forces is not theoretical. UNEP's Faith for Earth Coalition has demonstrated that collaborations between scientists, policymakers, and faith leaders amplify impact, translating technical solutions into culturally resonant, morally compelling actions that communities embrace. This integrated approach creates peer accountability, community pressure, and moral obligation, factors that laws and regulations alone often cannot generate. Ultimately, this nexus allows us to shift the needle by tackling complex interconnected challenges. Climate change, biodiversity loss, water insecurity, and public health are not isolated problems. They are systemic. Solutions require systemic thinking, empirical rigor, policy coherence, and moral commitment working together to shift societal norms. Only through this triad can we achieve sustained behavioral change, societal resilience, and a globally shared sense of responsibility. Friends, distinguished guests, fellow changemakers, in conclusion, we need to make our shared responsibility dream possible. The journey we have is ambitious, even daunting, but the challenges before us demand nothing less. Human security and planetary security are inseparable. Without a thriving, resilient Earth, there can be no safety, no dignity or prosperity for humanity. Without moral reflection and behavioral change, science and policy alone cannot deliver sustainability. We must understand that humans are not conquerors, but participants in a living system. This entails acknowledging the warnings of science, respecting the limits of our ecosystems, and integrating moral and spiritual principles into the very fabric of our decision-making. We must recognize moral values in our consumption and production patterns. Reducing waste, improving efficiency, and consuming ethically are not merely acts of personal virtue. They are imperatives for global survival. Consumers, businesses, and governments must act together, guided not only by law, but by conscience. Religious institutions with their unique reach and moral authority can catalyze this transformation, ensuring that ethical considerations are embedded in choices at every level of society. We must rediscover the moral and spiritual roots of humanity and human rights. The right to a healthy environment enshrined in international relations echoes the ethical teachings of civilizations across centuries. We must reset our mindset from human superiority to human humility. The billions of other species that share this planet are not mere resources. They are co-inhabitants. Humility teaches us restraint, interconnectedness, and respect, guiding our policies, technologies, and social structures. We stand at a last chance moment, what I have called the destructive reconstruction. We must dismantle unsustainable systems, discard short-termism, and rebuild structures grounded in equity, justice, and sustainability. Young people must lead. Gender equality must be fully realized. No community should be marginalized. Nationalism must give way to multilateral cooperation, informed by shared ethical and spiritual values. Faith, ethics, science, and policy must converge in a science, policy, spirituality nexus. This is where knowledge meets conscience and where strategy meets purpose. When scientists, policymakers, and faith leaders work in concert, they create a force capable of shifting societal norms, mobilizing communities, and pressuring governments to act decisively. In shifting the needle, let us envision a future where children inherit clean rivers, fertile soils, and stable climates. Communities are resilient to disasters, and vulnerable populations are protected. Energy, transport, and agriculture systems operate sustainably, guided by ethics as well as efficiency. Governance structures integrate ecological, social, and spiritual wisdom, ensuring decisions respect both humanity and nature. This vision is not naive, it is necessary. History has tested our capacity for collaboration, compassion, and courage. The task is immense, but the potential is even greater. We are the generation that can change course. We can reconcile with nature, realign our values, and reshape societies. We can shift the needle on environmental action, turning despair into hope, crisis into opportunity, and intention into impact. Friends, let us leave this conference with a renewed sense of purpose, grounded in science, guided by policy, and inspired by ethics and spirituality. Let us be the generation that recognizes that human security and planetary security are one and the same, and act accordingly. Let this be our shared legacy, a world where people and nature thrive together, where justice and humanity guide our actions, and where the moral, spiritual, and scientific foundations of society are fully aligned in pursuit of a sustainable, secure, and just future. Thank you very much indeed.